Well, hello, everybody. We're back with the CMA Panel Podcast, episode 4. We've heard the poll that we put out, and everybody would like to discuss license management. So we have a few angles that we're going to come at this, and those will be revealed as we kind of go through all of the introductions. You're also going to see some new faces and some familiar ones. So let's start off with some of the new people that are joining us. Rob Greeley is CMA who was actually in my cohort. So him and I have, we go way back to January 2023, but we did have that immersive experience and joined that. So Rob, go ahead and introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Sure. So my experience, as I said, has been both on the customer side and largely on the customer side, and then also on the partner side. So I've been back and forth from one side of this whole process to the other. And I definitely, currently, I'm the Chief Operating Officer, COO of a electric vehicle charging company named Jolt, based out of Germany. And we're heavily using ServiceNow, and like I'd say most other customers, also struggling with license management. So it's a very timely topic.
Excellent. Okay, and Brian, I think you've been on one of the previous ones earlier on, didn't you?
I
Or is this your
was
first
actually
time?
going to, but I had a schedule conflict. So
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I saw your name accept, and then I think I must have missed the decline. But welcome to your first
Thank you.
CMA podcast. Go ahead and introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Yeah, hello. So been a CMA since actually was in the first virtual cohort during COVID days. So didn't get to do any of the on-site in my cohort, but been working with ServiceNow for since about 2012 or so.
Nice.
Currently with Accenture Federal, working with the Department of Defense Agency.
Oh, excellent. Okay, and we all remember Chris New from the past episode, so just go ahead for anybody that's new.
Well, I'm actually new, so my little pun for the day. So no, Chris New. I currently work for New Rocket. I am the Global Practice Director of Architecture. I actually was the second cohort to go through the CMA program. So I have been a CMA for quite a while. I actually helped build the CTA program that you have out there. Did a lot of work for ServiceNow. Spent 7 years of my career there. Prior to being at ServiceNow, I was on the customer side as well. I am loving my time here at New Rocket, helping to drive customer success and looking to bring whatever experience I have from license management. I definitely come from the non-sell side conversation of license management. As we all know, typically when somebody asks us a licensing question, we say, oh, let's go talk to your sales guy. However, there's many aspects of licensing. I know one of the things I can't wait to talk about on here is subscription management, which a lot of people are not taking advantage of and probably should. So that's what I'm trying to bring to this, and I'm looking forward to working and talking with all the guys on here.
Excellent. Okay, and Greg Mest looks like he's the most comfortable of us on the episode today. Just chill. It's awesome. Love it. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, hi, Greg Mest. So, like Chris, I've been around a long time. I was in the first CMA cohort, which was more like we were all figuring out as we went. So that was 2019. I started with ServiceNow in 2010. It was with them for a while with professional services. I worked for Workday as a customer for a few years, been with a partner, and now I've got my own company. So sort of been through the whole journey of ServiceNow, and so happy to be here.
Excellent. And Abhishek, we welcome you back to another episode. Thanks again for making time for us. But go ahead and introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Thank you, Chris. Abhishek Srivastava. I am a senior architect at IBM Consulting. Hearing from the veteran CMAs here, I am one of the newest CMAs. I got my CMA probably May 2023. So one of the newest, learning from everybody here. However, I have been into the service management space for around 18 years. And with ServiceNow ecosystem for around 10 years. I've been a customer at one of my companies which I joined, and probably 17 years of my career I've been consulting. I've worked with a lot of customers who talk about struggling with license management. And in the past few years, ServiceNow kind of, had a complex subscription module where most of my customers struggled. So I've helped a lot of customers doing some configurations in the application so that the licenses can be tracked. And I'm happy to share all of those while we are talking here. But very happy to be a part of this CMA panel.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us. So we're going to dive on in. Let us know if you have any questions. Feel free to post them in the chat at any time, and we'll get to it and discuss it. But in the meantime, while those are coming in, let's start with the subscription management piece that Chris New had brought up, because that is kind of where you go for understanding your heartbeat and where you're at. So, Chris New, do you mind giving a bit of an overview of what you were wanting to discuss?
Yeah, no. So many times the question comes and like, hey, how can I tell where I'm at from a licensing perspective? How can I tell how many licenses I have available? How can I tell if I'm over? Back in the day, we all used to love seeing our customers get those emails from ServiceNow that says, hey, you're 1,000 over your licensing, and they're like, well, how? And so ServiceNow used to run these scripts. I actually think that may still be how they go and do their licensing, is they run a script and that's how they pull the information back. So yeah, so as a customer, how do I see that? How do I understand where I'm at and where I need to be? So subscription management is a great tool that provides you a dashboard, an overview, a visual of what you're trying to stay within. It's going to show you where you have the issues where you maybe lose or you're over your compliance. It's going to show you the situations where you still have room to grow. And so I think that turning that on, activating that, getting that in place, and here's the thing, turning it on is not all you got to do. You have to go in there and do the configurations. You got to make for sure it's giving you accurate data, just like any tool inside the system. It's not flip a switch and I'm good to go. It's get in there, make sure you're getting it correctly, make sure it looks right, and make sure it's achieving the end result you're trying to get to. So don't just turn it on, say, hey, we're good, I turned it on. No, go in there and make sure it's right, make sure it's accurate. And with all the different subscription models that are out there nowadays, I mean, I still learn about them today. I actually heard about one the other day, which is a what was it? Users. It was not. It had nothing to do with them being assigned a role. They were just basically any user in the system was a license or took away a license. And I was like, I had never heard of that licensing model till that day. So, but it was tracked inside of subscription management. And if you just go in there and configure it, set it up, you can see where you're at, how it's working. So I know that's my experience with subscription management. Love to hear anybody else's thoughts on it.
Yeah, I liked the point you brought up about you have to configure it after you turn it on. I see a lot of customers go out and just turn it on and then just say, well, the data's there. And then when they get that, the report, the Excel sheet from your ServiceNow account rep, and it's like, well, you're over by this amount. And then how do you make sense of all those sysids for the users and stuff? That's a great point to call out. Let's shift quickly a bit to the business side of it. Rob,
I would say a big part of this whole conflict is understanding your contract. And I've seen this with a number of companies, but it just real recently, we had a real live example where, for example, if you look at the project management module, SPM, and how it's been licensed for a while and how that interacts with ITSM. And if you don't know exactly how you are licensed versus how maybe other groups have been licensed, there was ITSM used to have the ITSA license, which is what I was familiar with, which actually included a lot of PPM functionality. But ITSM doesn't. Whereas, and then similarly, there's been a series of licenses in SPM that include different capabilities. And I recently had a case where an architect, we had a set of dashboards that were heavily used by the business. Those dashboards had included a dot walk over to the project table to just pull the name of the project and the status. That's it. No big deal. And I had a number of people who were complaining about to the architects about why can't I see the full dashboard? There's certain things that are missing on it. So the architect went in and said, okay, great. I'll just grant them access to this project table so that they can see that information. 2 fields off the whole project table. And then suddenly ServiceNow is reaching out and saying, oh, you now have triple the number of users in project management that you have licenses. those are the most expensive fields that have ever been added to a report.
Yes.
And then that, which then drove a whole reorganization. We had to go figure out why, and then talk to the business leaders and tell them, no, you can't have access to those fields because it's too expensive. Blah blah blah. Escalations back to ServiceNow discussions, etc. So you have to really be careful. You really have to know what you're licensed for and how that model works. And then that ties all the way through the access rights and just granting access to one table to two fields, all of a sudden, by the way, can drive huge license problems if you don't really understand your licenses. So it's that combination of what's the business need and what are they asking for? And sometimes you have to push back on them because you have to really understand what the impact that's going to have on your licenses.
I agree. And you kind of went into that contract. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Okay.
No, Brian,
I would also add under that, having a good relationship with your ServiceNow impact team is a big help there. If you've got regular collaborative conversations with them about what you're doing and the licensing versus if you only have a licensing conversation when you get hit with that report of you're over, that's a big factor too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the interesting thing is that there are no notifications available right now, because I've been working with a couple of customers who have their order forms in which line wise they are describing what are the number of licenses they are dedicating to each of the applications. And when we exceed those, there are no notifications in the system. So some of my customers have complained about it and have solutioned some notifications to be going out there, or taking away the role from the users who do not use a certain kind of license for a particular amount of time. So those are the things. But where most of my customers want to lean on is they want to understand how is their order form being translated to what it shows in the subscription management. Sometimes it's not clear, and you have to bring in an architect to read between the lines, to explain them. And like Rob described, adding those two fields, the most costly fields in the world, this happens at most of the places. And then having a relationship with impact is really important. What I have done with one of my recent customers, a big healthcare customer, is that we have established a scrum of scrums with ServiceNow, IBM, and the customer, and everyone gets a turn to speak what they have. In this way, we are transparent. What is our problem? We want to know the product, and it gets explained by the impact, the experts in ServiceNow. So those are some things what we have done recently, which I would definitely want people listening on this call to do.
Well, and it's crazy too, because you're talking about a lot of what we're talking about is centered around users. But licensing is much more than just users. It's your custom tables, it's your scoped applications, it's all of that. And so you've got to account for all that. That's where I come in and say subscription management is your picture. It gives you the picture. How many custom tables do I have on the instance? How many customers out there could go into their system right now today, look at it and go, I have this many custom tables? I'd say not a lot. I say that they need something help. And that's where that subscription management, I think, brings the picture to them and shows them, and they can just visually, okay, we're at 52 custom tables. No wonder I'm getting that bill from ServiceNow.
That's right. And it allows them to make those value-based decisions. Is it worth it to add another custom table? One piece I'd like to just go back that Rob brought up was the contract review. So as soon as I get to that trusted advisor status within the organization, I start to slowly ask them, can you give me the contract? Can you give me the contract? I don't even need to see the financials on it, but what I really care about is those SKUs and what they cover. And that helps me shape the direction of some of the architectural decisions that I make. So I'll give two examples. One example is a customer had a bid out for SPM, but we found out that they didn't actually need any net new business stakeholder licenses. They had everybody covered under ITSM. So that changed our bid and our ask of ServiceNow for the pricing model. And another customer I work with does everything in scoped apps. So they have enough licenses for every single person in the organization to be a scoped app fulfiller. So when we're building things, it may be technically a better home in ITSM, but they may not have that ITSM fulfiller. So they go into a scoped app for licensing reasons. We can debate the good, bad of that side of things that way, but we're already too far down that road to kind of change that piece. And they're very quick with the app building now side of things. So how do we all get to that stage where we can review that contract, understand it, and then align it to Chris News service or subscription management piece?
So two things
Greg.
I'll jump in with, Chris. One is to the earlier discussion. There's the reason it's gotten the way it's gotten is because the platform wasn't designed for this kind of licensing. It was designed for an incredibly simple licensing model, which is fulfillers and admins, and that's it. That's the way that's Fred's vision for it. Well, things change when you become a public company and you have quarterly results you have to meet. So I remember back in the day, I was involved with a ServiceNow discussion about approval licenses. And I kept having to tell them, there's nothing in the system that's going to enforce that licensing when I say this person is an approver. It's not designed that way. So a lot of the complications are just because of the system not being built that way from the ground up. Right. The second thing is to the later discussion. One of the things I know I struggle with, and I'd be interested in other folks, is when customers come to me with their business problems and I'm designing a solution, I really don't want to have to, I'm going to say, design the wrong or the least or less optimal solution because I have to work around licensing. And so that's a fine line we as kind of architects have to walk constantly. And I'm wondering if folks, the other guys on the call, have experience with that, and what you're
absolutely. It's always a big bump, for example, between the standard and pro editions. You say, we're on the standard. Oh, but we want to use one little feature. Oh, sorry, that's in pro. Well, that doesn't pay for itself, so we're not going to use it. And especially when you get into big companies, you get a very big company and you get one group wants to use a little bit of performance analytics. They certainly don't want to pay for the whole upgrade to pro for that, but they just want to use a little bit. And another group over here maybe wants to use a little bit of playbooks. Oh, well, okay. They're certainly not just for that one feature, for that one use case. And so you end up with nobody wanting to pay for the upgrade. It's a very Boolean set of upgrades,
Yes.
Make the toughest upgrade, right? Massive cost, especially at a very large organization for anything that pushes you over the threshold.
Yeah. So a couple things here. So one, I wanted to circle back to what Greg talked about, because Greg, you and I, being some of the first few CMAs, we probably been on this tool for a while, as many of you have, and that approval thing. I remember when that was going down back with ServiceNow, when they were trying to, people are trying to find ways around to get approvers to be able to not have to log into the system just to approve. How can this happen? So I remember that whole conversation. And what's interesting is how that's morphed. Like, I literally, and y'all aren't going to believe me, but I promise you this conversation went down. I had a customer ask me, can I recreate all the ServiceNow roles out there and make custom roles so that I don't have to pay the licensing? And I literally looked at him and was like, you're joking, right? So that was a conversation I had. I'm going to recreate every single role. And I'm like, well, you're going to go through all the ACL. So it was a great conversation. But another thing, and this was actually, Rob, you kind of sparked this in my mind, is when you start thinking about solutioning something for a customer, I'll give you a great one that comes along all the time, is a customer that's asking for, hey, I need to sync a couple of instances of ServiceNow. How many times is the first thing that comes to your mind? It's going to be IDR. That's ServiceNow's new. It's the fancy. They want to sync, man. That's the way to do it. It's IDR. Well,
but you don't have the license.
IDR comes with a cost. It's expensive. And if you're doing a one-time sync, why do I want to pay for something that's going to do a one-time sync, but it's meant to keep it going and going and going? So you have to evaluate those use cases, understand what you're trying to achieve before you go in. Another good one is a remote process sync that's out there. Okay, well, that's a great tool. It's available for you. You can do that. But guess what? It's Integration Hub. It's a spoke. It costs money. So how do you build the use case for what a customer is looking for? You have to evaluate their use case, understand what Rob said, their licensing. What did they sign for contract? What do they own? And then come up with your solution. So as an architect, as a person going in there, there's a lot you have to factor in before you actually get to this is my solution for you.
Yeah, that brings up another, you talked about the gotchas with the approver licenses. The transaction licenses on Integration Hub was one that threw a loop up for a lot of people too. Yeah.
Well, and then similar to that is discovery. And
Yes.
Well, we're licensing that by node. Well, I don't know how many nodes we're going to find. Well, first of all, there's a question.
What's a node? Yeah.
Yes.
But similar case. I was working on I was a platform owner at a site where we basically just decided to turn on cloud discovery, and all of a sudden, boom, we're now way over our licenses for discovery because nobody really knew what was in the cloud. All we did was enable a couple of features and just drove ourselves way above the licensing limit.
I think for me, I mean, certainly where I provide value is I'm in between what ServiceNow is trying to sell the customer, right? So the customer needs X. ServiceNow is going to say, well, we've got something that'll do that. I'm in there saying, okay, let's look at that. Let's look at both what that technical solution means and also what the licensing means. And is it the right solution for you in both senses? Or could we build something like Rob, to your point, that just satisfies that small functionality that you need? You don't have to buy a suite to get one piece of the suite, right? Could we build that just in the platform? Maybe take on a small custom license versus a large product suite license. But it's also fun for us too, I think, as CMAs is, we're supposed to be advocates of ServiceNow. So it's like, do we just say, yeah, buy the suite? That's what you should do. I don't want to do that. I want to do the right thing by the customer, but I also want to be an advocate of what ServiceNow is trying to do. So
I love Greg. You just used the bad word, the custom word with ServiceNow. but it's funny though. You think of that word and you think of when you're trying a solution. I always go back to that example of the IDR, remote processing, all these amazing out of the box tools that are available that cost money. At the end of the day, you get down to it and the customer can't afford any of them solutions. What do you go to? You got to build a custom integration to allow that to work. So that's where, like, as an architect, your job is way more than just, hey, let me give you the best solution. It's what do you own? What are you paying for? And what meets the need of what you're trying to achieve? Right. And like that, it's funny that you go into the conversation, your first three questions are usually, hey, what's your contract look like? Do you own IDR? Do you own Integration Hub? No. Okay, well, then we're building a custom integration to sync your two systems together because that's our option.
Yeah, I worked with a customer that was exploring IDR to sync 3 fields. So kind of along the same report thing that Rob was bringing up. And I deliberately excluded it from the value-led plan that I was providing them with all the options. And then one of their sysadmins came in and said, well, what about IDR? And me knowing the budget that we were working with and knowing the timeline and the procurement method that applied to this customer, I said, well, I deliberately didn't include it for this reason. And, the program manager at the time said, no, let's explore it. So 2 weeks were lost waiting on a full quote, and then, oh my God, I can't believe it's that expensive. And I said, well, I did give you the ballpark. And it isn't a knock on ServiceNow. All of these tools have all of that value, but like Greg said, sometimes I don't have the budget to buy a Ferrari to go buy groceries. I would love it, and I might have to make several trips because the trunk is so small, but I do that because I'd love to, because
it's a Ferrari.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
You know what's funny though, Chris, is so back in my time when I worked at ServiceNow, one of my biggest sell points for me was my relationship and knowledge of domain separation. I lived and breathed domain separation, so I knew it really well. And I can remember one situation where I was brought into a customer, and the customer they were actually selling the customer on application sign-on, and I came in and I was like, ooh, I'm not sure about that, and started evaluating the use case. And before talking to the sales team, I came in, I was like, oh, y'all need to go with domain separation. You want to talk about the shock and awe on some salespeople's faces when I suggest a product with a major uplift in licensing costs that's going to cost this customer a lot, and them thinking, oh, there's no way they're going for this. But then at the end of the day, I sold them on the fact of how it was going to be better, how it was going to meet what they were trying to achieve. I sold them on all that. I gave them a pros and cons list and wound up upselling. So you wanted to talk about going from a situation where first of all, I have sales guys going, Chris, don't say that. Chris, don't say that. To all of a sudden them going, thanks, Chris. We just upsold this customer. So it's really situations like that even if they don't own it, doesn't mean you don't talk about it. You can still, hey, this is an option out there and it's better and it works better. And this is why it works better. And then let them make the choice. I mean, if they don't want to spend the money, they don't want to spend the money, but give them the option.
So, well, go ahead, Greg. Did you have your hand up?
No, it's just right.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, so Rob, from the client side, I've got a bit of a question for you. How can we, as the technical advisors, earn your trust as the client so that we can be a part of those sales journeys earlier? And let me give you a couple frameworks. First framework experience that I'm currently in is that zero trust, and I am completely out of it, and I get all of the stuff downstream. So it's like, okay, well, we met with sales, here's their proposal, and they said Integration Hub Enterprise for this one spoke, and we don't have that money. Versus another client where I literally ran the internal workshop, sent an outline for a demo to ServiceNow. ServiceNow did the demo. I gave them the key stakeholders. I was heavily involved right from the start. And at the end of that process, everything was mutually understood on both sides. Nobody was sold more than they needed. Everything was relevant to what we were trying to do. So how do we get to that state? What do you look for as a customer?
It absolutely would be from a partner perspective. You've got to understand the licenses. You have to understand the puts and takes of those. I guess do your homework before you get into there, and then be able to explain the options. So just kind of like you were saying, well, if we go with this, it's going to be, we give you here's the advantages, but that requires the pro version. Without the pro version, here's another option. It would solve the problem, but you may not like, and I want you to allow me to make the decision, but you need to be able to explain the options, and really explain and sometimes that's complicated. You have. So back to what you're saying. You said, Chris, you were having trouble getting to the licenses. Show me the contract. I've never had any trouble showing the contract, or at a minimum, here's the SKUs and the that go along with it, and the volumes that go with it.
Right.
I really appreciate that upfront discussion about here's the SKUs and here's the limits of the SKUs you have.
Right. And that is so foundational to what we're doing. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, something I was going to say is, Rob, one thing that you mentioned there that actually comes to light too is so many times we get into this case of giving the recommendation, showing them what they can't do, but not actually saying, this is what I think you should do. And that's the key to that whole conversation. Isn't just, hey, you've got 4 different options over here, but they're looking at you as your trusted advisor. Tell them this is the one I would go with.
Recommendation. Yeah. And I'm a little bit of an anomaly, right? I'm a customer who's also a CMA.
Yes,
so I can do a lot of my own recommendations.
Yep.
But even then,
that's the problem. I face this problem a lot when the customer side of architects who are CMAs and CTAs, they understand the system very well. And when we go out with their recommendations, although we have recommended the same thing with a lot of customers, been successful with that, there is always a caveat they bring into this. Okay, if you do this, how about I am customizing the solution? And then we need to involve the impact team and get the same answers from them, which they are okay with. So it's kind of, there's a thin line, when you have equally qualified people on the customer side as well, and they understand things.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely want the opinion, right? Make a strong, educated opinion and back it up.
Right. And just to kind of go back to one other piece that we had talked about, and we're taking questions. So if you're listening live, feel free to post a question and we'll answer it to the best of our abilities. But when you were talking about how some cases, one department needs this spoke, and I'll use Integration Hub as another one needs another one. I try to back it up as a larger enterprise strategic decision so that they can distribute that integration hub license costs across multiple departments. And that really does help strengthen the business case. And then they need a timeline comparison. And this is where I really see people take Integration Hub very seriously. So we've got one that we're looking at, and they need 4 spokes from enterprise across all 4 different departments. Now, this means we have to get 4 VPs or directors to sign on to this cost and distribute it divided by 4 across the thing. But the timeline versus custom build, we can deploy all 4 in about a month with all the connectors. And the custom versions is, measured at about 8 or 9 months. So when they're looking at when can I turn that value meter on and start, generating value with the solution, that has now become a key factor in the decision making. Ultimately, of course, it all does come down to, do we have the money or not, or is the budget available or not? And even if you can say, you'll save $1 million if you spend 100,000, sometimes you just don't have that 100,000. You got 50,000 to build the MVP custom version and then maintain it.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Brian, I can't remember who mentioned it, was talking about Integration Hub and the transaction costs. So I think it was you, Brian, but one thing, and I'm sure everybody here has had to deal with this conversation, is you go into a customer and they say, hey, I want all my integrations built through Integration Hub. And you look at them and you're like, well, okay, I've got spoke for these 2, but these other 5, there's no spoke out there. Why do you want it going through Integration Hub? What's the value that brings you going through Integration Hub? And so you got to have that conversation. Yeah, the transaction costs, the transactions are pretty high. It's going to be very, very difficult to hit those, but you still have to weigh that. You have to go, okay, I build all 10 of your integrations through Integration Hub, and every one of those is taking away those transactions, and we actually hit that mark. Who are you going to come back and yell at? You're going to come back and yell at me.
That's right. Yeah, especially if you're doing like a Teams integration or anything. Sorry, go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say, I do think that half the battle with from the customer side with license management is corporate politics. I mean, it's who's consuming all the licenses? Well, who's going to pay for that? Who back to your transactions, right? Who pays for those extra transactions? Oh, not me. No, not me. It's this sort of thing where everybody's pointing in a different direction.
Yeah.
It definitely is it's a bit of an argument that you have to get into. So you have to be really, that discussion you had about backing up that discussion and trying to go to the, 4 departments, each want 1 spoke. Yes, it may take, you said, hey, I can get it in 1 month instead of 9. Yeah, but it may take a year to get the decision.
Yes, to get everybody sign on.
To get it all the way up to the next corporate budget cycle, to get it maybe added in the next set of licenses. So from a customer side, there's a lot of that senior level discussion and horse trading and wrangling to try to get any sort of license decision there.
Definitely.
Well, one of the things we could talk about Integration Hub. That's one that's near and dear to my heart, because what I find most of the times is if the customer doesn't want or needs it to work differently than ServiceNow has provided, it's very difficult. It's challenging to tweak it for the needs. Whereas I could build one using the old school REST message with a few lines of code, and it does exactly what the customer needs. This is to Abhishek's point. If the customer has developers in-house, they're actually going to understand my REST message integration more than they're going to be able to understand the Integration Hub. So many of the things ServiceNow builds is built for the lowest common denominator, someone who doesn't understand a line of code. And so particularly from an integration standpoint, most people, if they've done any kind of development, understand what an API is, understand how to call an API. And I'm just like, I'm not sure why we're doing this unless you really have zero in-house expertise who can manage this. So it's yet another one of those, okay, what does the customer have? What kind of people do they have working there? Let's make some decisions based on that, in addition to licensing.
Yep. So recently, to that point, Greg, great point. I'm working with a customer, and they are big on this workday front, and plus they have a data lake where they are sending the data from the workday. So one stakeholder wants me to go through the data lake, get the data. The other stakeholder wants me to integrate with workday, and I keep on scratching my head explaining them, guys, you have the spoke. ServiceNow has already worked with Workday, spent $1 million on that integration to have the spoke going. Why don't you want to use that? And everyone understands that, but there are corporate strategies and then again corporate politics as to why you want the data hub. The company has heavily invested in the data lake and all those things. So there are a lot of things going on, and then we have to bring out the clear picture, the value what is going to get. So like the workday, you can orchestrate your workflows from ServiceNow system of action to the system of record, get those approvals done. Whereas one data lake where you just get the data in. So we need to bring those out and let them explain. And when I explained this to my customer, they were like, oh yeah, I have a team, but again, I'll have to spend some SOWs, some developers, get on board, and then build the integration. Versus use the spoke, which is already there in my enterprise edition of integration hub. So a lot of customers understand that, and luckily my customer understood, so we were good. But again, integration hub has its own limitations, not available for all the applications out there. So
I do think the more challenging aspect of Integration Hub is not just buying Integration Hub or not; it's the what level.
yeah,
Again, when you talk about the questions of well, one team there wants Integration Hub, but they only need one that's one of the standard integrations. Another team wants one, but they are in the professional level, and there's a team over here that needs one, but oh, by the way, that's only available in the Enterprise Edition. And it makes it complex to then try to make a decision and try to split out the costs. So, not to make this a complaint session. It's just one of the challenges you have to work through in really trying to understand the licenses and then pitch them, and then try to figure out how to subdivide that cost at a corporate level.
Well, and I wouldn't even view that as a complaint. Like, that is a legitimate challenge that everybody has to address because of the cost. It's always going to come down to that cost. Sorry, I saw. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, one of the things as a platform architect too, you have to consider is, are we going to have a unified strategy for how we're doing this particular thing? Or are we going to use Integration Hub here and a custom here and something else here and a third party here? And that's not just an integration thing. It's, as ServiceNow keeps coming out with new tools, we're going to use workflows and flows, and it's just it becomes a maintenance challenge when you've got 5 different solutions that are solving. It's not the same problem, but the same type of problem across all the various applications. So just another thing to consider.
And that's great, because that actually takes me to the next kind of area that I was hoping we could discuss, and that's how do we hand off license management? Because ultimately, I, as the consultant, can't own that license management data or the cost. I can provide key factors to consider, a timeline, recommendations for reduction or strategic areas where we can go. But how do you all look at handing that off? So we've launched a new product. How do we hand over license management so that they can effectively take it over and not get the gotcha bill or the gotcha compliance check? And shout out to ServiceNow too. When you run through that, I have had nothing but fantastic experiences where they work with us to get under.
Yes.
So they'll say, oh, one client I just worked with this year, 300 over. And they're like, don't worry. Like, what we identified as how that we got there was we could reduce it and eliminate it. And in another case for the same customer, we couldn't. So then, I had to emotionally prepare them for a large bill, backdated large bill.
Yeah, no,
But how do you do the license management? Sorry, go ahead.
I think answering your question is exactly what I started this whole conversation, which with subscription management. And
Yes.
I'm a firm believer that subscription management should be included as something we set up and configure as part of a project. Like 100% we should be. And if we're not, like, honestly, it should be part of that core foundation platform setup, because leaving a customer without that leaves them with the first year that they're in, they're going to get that bill and they're going to be like, wait, what's going on? They don't want that shock and awe. You set up subscription management and give them a visual that they can go look at, monitor over time. When they get to that license compliance that ServiceNow is running for them, they're going to know what they're expecting. Hey, we are over by 200. We expected that. We knew that was coming. So I think that should be included in almost every project. And I know that it's right, maybe right now for many companies it's not. It's an additional overhead, but I would highly suggest adding it as something we configure and set up for them.
Yeah, I agree. Some of the most successful projects I've been on have an operational section. So if it's a 10-month project, they add the last 2 months are, how do we operationalize this thing? How do we set up all the data insights? How do we, do the knowledge transfer? So it's really enabling people to run with the baton after that, so that they don't have to come back and sign that extra, we need 3 more months of your time to teach us what you did.
Yeah.
Let's do it as big part of the whole project. That can also be a tough sell to the customer. I mean, because that's, an implementation project is 8 months, and then here we need another 2 months to teach you. That can be a tougher sell for sure. But those customers that go out and do that, ultimately in the long run, have the best experience, have the best delivery outcomes, and don't have the surprises coming down the pipe.
Definitely agree with that. I would say another area to avoid surprises is make sure you incorporate license checks into your governance process, that you don't have people that can just turn on plugins and, oh, by the way, we're now getting charged for this, right? So you have, if somebody wants to enable something, it goes through your normal technical governance, and part of that is checking whether you have the license for it or not. Yeah.
Yes, that speaks to something dear to my heart. So just like you love your integration hub, Greg, I love my governance. So yes, having that reach through the technical governance and strategic governance boards will help shape demand as well. So they're all connected. And if they want to enable that plugin, then they need to first make sure we have it, have the licensing. Then that can, if they don't, goes to strategic. Do we have the budget and the will to do this? And then when you're in those demand meetings, then you can say, hey, let's end this discussion now. We don't have the licensing. We don't have the budget for it this year. Come back next fiscal, or spend your time now building your business case so that the budget can be allocated next fiscal.
Yeah, it is. It's all too easy to implement a plugin in test or dev and not find out that it's going to cost money until you go to push it into prod. And you have to, and there's no automatic flags until you go to try to push it into prod.
Yeah.
And when I was at Workday, because of its Workday, one of their big things was, and this became a head scratcher for me, is like, well, how does ServiceNow handle transfers and terminations? How do we make sure when someone either moves to another department or leaves the company that we unallocate everything that we've allocated to them? Now, I think the short answer is probably, as long as you inactivate their user account, I'm going to hope that they're no longer included in licensing accounts.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I wish ServiceNow had a better, like, there's lots of great stuff for getting things going, but not lots of great stuff for keeping it going or spinning it down. I don't know what the right term is. Like, if someone leaves the company, if you've got a fulfiller that leaves the company, how do you make sure all their stuff gets reallocated? Like,
Right.
it's all just manual, right? You go to lists and look for things. I wish there was a better product. We started building some automation around that, but I mean, certainly that's a piece of it, right? If you've got, you want to have tight licensing, you got to make sure that when someone no longer needs a license, you take that license away, right? You unallocate those things.
Yeah.
So that's
as you're saying, it is fortunate that an allocated license doesn't count if it's an inactive user.
Yeah.
Right.
The way that it's not, because you're really not allocating licenses. You're just counting people with active users with given access. Right.
And I think
And ServiceNow averages it out, I believe, as well. So, they they know that people come, people go within the organization. So it is not a single count and a single snapshot. They do average it out as far as I know. So take it with that grain of salt. Do not, I need safe harbor, not legal advice. Don't come after me. But they do recognize that we have this onboarding, offboarding experience with fulfillers. Maybe a team happens, or maybe there's a large onboard for a bit and a large offboard for a different reason. And it'll kind of average out over time. And the compliance team will work with you. So if you see that you get that notice, know that it's the starting point of a discussion. And then from there, an action plan has to be derived, and then you need to show progress within that action plan.
Yeah. Make sure you do take action, but
Yeah.
yes, it's an action plan.
Has anybody here worked with time limited roles? Speaking of licensing, because that's a relatively new feature
That's
within
a
the
relatively new
platform.
thing.
Yeah.
I know
So from
I know I
Go
haven't
ahead.
seen it. I know that we've had a previous life. We had a group that had a limited number of licenses for a module, and they would basically built a whole workflow to assign and remove those licenses. Right, I'll put you into that group that assigned you that role, and then automatically pull you out a week later,
Exactly.
simply to try to minimize the licenses.
Yeah, I had somebody
Similarly,
that was trying to do that for approval licenses. Yeah, when
Mhm.
an approval got created, you got dropped into the group, and after you approved it, it took you out.
Yeah, this was for like application portfolio management. You know, they had three, many thousands of different applications, each with each own application owner, and they didn't want to buy thousands of application owner licenses. So they basically said, once a year, you come in, you check out a license, you use it for a week, and then you leave to get your data filled in.
Yeah. So time limited would work in that case for sure. I think it
Hadn't
was
heard about it.
intended for that. So yeah, I'm not sure if it's Washington. I know for sure Xanadu has it. I also have seen customers need that exactly for business stakeholder. I approve 3 requests a year type of a thing. Why am I spending X dollars a month for that? So they also kind of had the similar thing, but they had a different compliance experience in that they got the backdated invoice. And that was very early on in my career. And it was an interesting scenario because then suddenly it became, don't go and do that. ServiceNow saw it and went, oh, how long have you been doing this? 7 months. Oh, okay. Well, over time, you've accumulated this much usage. Here's the bill. So, while you may want to do that, just know that there's a risk associated with it. But there's new solutions that are coming out. And again, so no one has implemented time-based roles just yet. It's a pretty interesting small little module, and it does all of those things. You can basically allocate it for a time. It's almost like that SNC access control. I grant this person this thing for this much start date, start time. You can automate it, of course, if scripting or whatever you want, or even a simple business rule can do it through a workflow or a flow. So yeah, I would definitely take a look at it, but that starts to get you into a conversation with your account rep and the sales team at ServiceNow to make sure that your intended usage of it is aligned with what time limited roles are basically intended for, so that you want to make sure that everybody is aware of what's happening. And then before you implement, I even don't mind showcasing the solution for it. In one case, we had one where we kind of built almost a little bit of a workaround for approvals on a portal, and it was technically a back door. So I had to go through some ServiceNow security and account reviews with them, show them the code, and basically say, here's where we're granting these roles. It's all covered under scoped apps. And now they can go and approve stuff without technically approver user or business stakeholder. Just want to call it out. And there's very tight controls around it. So nothing ITSM related or product related. It was all scoped app records.
Yeah, we've got a customer where we're using that capability for granting admin access. So other than a few core platform team members, everybody is using scoped admin within their delegated developer roles, but they can apply for a global admin for a time limited purpose. So
that's actually a pretty good idea if it maybe not just even for license management, but just the ability to say, hey, sure, I'll give it to you for 24 hours,
Yeah.
a week.
Yeah, you could do that for admin governance for
Yeah.
it as well, right? I don't need security admin all day, every day. So
Right. Yeah, I'll give it to you for one project just to push this live, and then 24 hours later, I don't have to, then as a central admin, I don't have to go remember to go pull them back out again.
Exactly, right. Reducing that manual effort so that you reduce manual mistakes. Okay. So does anybody have a war story they want to talk about? I mean, I'm sure that they can.
Not a war story, but
sure.
just another little wrinkle on licensing that you may or may not have run into yet. But for the generative AI use cases, normally ServiceNow has said that the non-production environments don't have a licensing impact, but for generative AI, you're actually entitled in non-production instances as well. So you turn on generative AI in a non-prod instance, you're paying for it.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay,
be aware of that. Yeah.
And that's true all across our demo instances as well, what the partners get from ServiceNow.
wow. Okay.
IBM has a plethora of instances, demo instances given by ServiceNow, probably 150 or 200, but we can use generative AI only in one of those instances. We cannot install it all across.
Do the
So
now
that is again-
assists? Do the assists
Yeah.
count as well?
Yeah.
So not just the product cost, but then the actual meters on. So then when you're running some of those tests, right?
Yeah.
That'd be interesting to see then, because then that may make a case against ATF. I might not want to make it that easy to do all of the end-to-end Gen AI testing through an ATF and end up with a big bill on that. That's it. That's very interesting to think that you'd have to bake into a project cost then for Gen AI as well that I didn't know about. Well, thank you for sharing that, Brian. Good. Wow.
Surprise.
Yeah. Right. Well, and we're trying to minimize the surprises, right? I don't mind getting the quote unquote bad news or the difficult news or the expensive news as long as I know it's coming as early as possible so that I can bake it into the plan and or pivot if I need to early on. Okay. Any other? Go ahead, Greg. Were you?
I was just wondering. I mean, what I typically find is when, let's say, we're introducing a new application, whether it's out of the box or custom, and I say, we've got these users who are going to need to work in this application, and they already have this role. They're already ITIL. They're already something else. What is the impact of adding this next role? And I always feel like the ServiceNow sales folks are like, I don't know. Can I get back to you? I don't. That feels like that should be an easy answer, but I'm wondering if other folks have had this experience where it's always like we're not sure.
Well, no,
I always go ahead.
But it's a very technical topic, right? It's
Yes.
very deep in the thing, and many, at least some of the account managers I've dealt with recently, are new to ServiceNow. They're more relationship people, and it gets very complicated.
Yeah, one of the I remembered the name of what I was talking about earlier when I talked about a customer that I've dealt with where they had a licensing model that I wasn't familiar with, and I had to learn it really quick, but it was called unrestricted users. And so they had the licensing model, which was called unrestricted user. So I was like, what the heck is an unrestricted? I'm so used to fulfiller versus just a self-service user. The two different types, and that's what you get licensed on. Unrestricted users was pretty much any user they added to the system was a license. So they have 7,000 users and they add that's 7,000 licenses that are taken up. And it was interesting to me because I hadn't run into that and that being sold in that manner before. It was specific to telecommunications, but it was just interesting to see because from that perspective, you're looking at it as a customer come in and they're like, well, we have 7,000 users, but we only bought 4,500 licenses for unrestricted licenses. And you're like, well, we got to figure out which of those users are going to stay in the system, which ones are not, or we've got to increase that.
I mean, it's a very advantageous way.
Yes.
We had experience where we had a very, very large IT organization relative to the size of the company, and just a very technical company. And so in that particular case, you could go with ITSM unrestricted users, and you didn't have to count fulfillers anymore, and it was actually less expensive than buying an ITSM license only for the fulfillers. Right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's
And
a,
I think
it's a yeah, it's a definitely choose one or the other, right?
Yeah, and that's where I was going to with what Greg was kind of talking about is you go with that unrestricted model. Now I don't have to look at each of those roles that I'm giving somebody and going, ooh, does that count? Does that count? Now you're just, okay, I've got a user in there. I can give them pretty much whatever role I want because they're unrestricted. So that model kind of could work in certain situations, which is what you're trying to describe there, Rob. But in other situations, it's like, why did you go with that?
Right.
And that speaks to the value led framework on these types of decisions. So not just the license cost per month, but then there's the admin effort, the operational effort, the maintenance, the compliance reviews. So I always try to make a business case for both and say, if you want to set it and forget it, and we've all had those executives that just give me the bill. I don't want to discuss it. I want to pay it once a year or whatever. Those are the ones. Unrestricted is the way to go for them, and you get that peace of mind. It ends all the licensing discussions for everybody
until you do a merger.
With 4 minutes left, let's talk about a brownfield to a greenfield migration. Then go, Rob. You brought it up.
It's a complete renegotiation of the licenses. But I mean, where you've also get into big license problems, and again, as a platform owner, you have to do it. Tends to be mergers and acquisitions or carve outs.
Yes.
Right. So you're now carving out 30% of a company. They need to build out their own license, their own ServiceNow. You're going to clone off ServiceNow to go with it, but who takes the licenses?
Right.
Or when you've just done an acquisition that is, grows your company by 20% and you're on unrestricted users, making sure that now those unrestricted users are going to bump up. That's going to, add 20% to your cost of your ServiceNow licenses.
Mm-hmm. It's always, it depends.
It's back to what I was saying is half of license management is being and understanding the corporate environment and really being involved in that, because those decisions that get made outside of you as the platform owner drive your license costs.
Right.
The decision of somebody else to stick a bunch of stuff on AWS all of a sudden drives up your discovery costs. You didn't do anything, but all of a sudden your platform cost goes up, right?
That's right. And, working through those discovery and event management ones, when they're adding to it, then you need to make sure that the license piece is at least discussed as part of that project. We want to put in this new office, or we want to discover a new class of CIs. Then yes, okay, well, do we have the license room for that? One last piece, and I know we're getting close to the end, is how I kind of use existing and unused licensing as kind of the things to focus on when there's that dead time. Now, I've got a couple customers where they have this luxury, and I know that that's rare, and I appreciate them for doing that. But it's kind of, they look to do 25 hours of delivery and then 15 hours of backlog, all that kind of stuff, getting the most value out of existing stuff and clean up. So we've parked across certain things and done a full license top down, ensured that they know what they have, and then presented all the options. And that's changed some of the strategic direction that the company wanted to take, and not in we were not going to do it, and now we are. More of just accelerating the timeline and pushing it earlier to start saying, hey, we can start this now, type of a thing. Has anybody ever run into that type of scenario?
Oh, definitely. It's from looking at value realization standpoint. If you're paying for a license, that should be somewhere on your roadmap to make sure you're taking advantage of it. Absolutely.
Yep. Great. Okay. Well, I think that's the end. We're right at time. So thank you, Rob. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Greg. And thank you, Abhishek, for joining us. Everybody listening in, feel free to reach out. You can ping questions and stuff into the chat, or you can add comments if you want onto the thread, and we will get back to you on it. So appreciate you all joining and spending time with us. And
thank
hope
you,
you
Chris.
have a great day. Yes.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us.